Welcome to Futures Hub, the podcast that ignites curiosity and navigates the pathways to tomorrow. I'm Mia, your guide on this journey into the future, where we explore the art of foresight, community co-creation, and personal growth. In each episode, we dive deep into innovative techniques to unlock the potential to shape our individual capacities and contribute to vibrant communities. Whether you're a seasoned futurist or just dipping your toes into the world of foresight, let's embark on this journey together. Welcome to Futures Hub. Welcome back to the Futures Hub podcast, where we explore how foresight, co-creation, and community engagement can help us imagine and build better futures for all. In this episode, I'm joined by Julius Lindsay, a futurist and leader in the environmental field in Canada with 20 years of experience in the areas of climate change, sustainability, and energy. Julius has led award-winning climate action and community engagement initiatives in cities and NGOs across the place now known as Canada. Julius is the co-lead for the Prismatic Project, which seeks to center Indigenous and Black perspectives through the lens of Indigenous futurist and Afrofuturist art, community engagement, and futures games to shift the conversation about and composition of climate action in Canada. In our conversation, Julius shares how physics and math led him to a career in climate governance and strategy, and how that analytical mindset continues to shape his approach to systems thinking and foresight. Together, we explore what it means to bring climate action to the community level, how to move from control to trust and empowerment, and how creative tools, from escape rooms to futures games, can help make climate conversations more meaningful and accessible. If you've ever wondered how to move beyond policy into real participation, or how to turn complex challenges into shared community opportunities, this episode is one you won't want to miss. Let's dive in. Thank you so much, Julius, for joining us today on the Futures Hub podcast. We are so excited to have you here today and so excited to hear your insights and your wisdom. You've worked in the environmental field in areas of policy and strategy development. What initially drew you to the intersection of climate and governance?
My answer for this is quite non-typical, which is student loans. I studied physics and math in university, and I had all the dreams of being a theoretical physicist. And I finished my bachelor's degree, and I had student loans, so I needed to get a job. So I got a job doing reporting and clerical type work at a provincial agency. And literally one day, somebody walked up to me and was like, "Julius, you know math, you could do these greenhouse gas calculations." I didn't know what a greenhouse gas was at the time, didn't know how to do the calculations, but I was like, sure, I could do them. And so I ended up doing those greenhouse gas calculations. And at the same time, our board chair was asking our organization to do its first sustainability report. And I happened to be the reporting specialist in the area that had sustainability in it. And so my boss and I ended up leading on the development of that sustainability report. At the time, the Green Energy Act was coming out. And so there was a lot of growth in this area. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. It's cutting edge. It aligns with my skills. I feel like I could grow a career from there.
A theoretical physicist into climate and governance. Do you find that you're able to pull nuggets of that passion into the work you do today, or does that feel like a previous iteration of Julius Lindsay?
It's definitely relevant. I often use the example of when I was in university, we would do proofs or we would do our problem sets from physics perspectives. Like you learn these theories and then they give you a problem set and you have to use the different theories, put them together in different ways to solve the problems. And that's essentially what you're doing from a climate change perspective, except it's parts of the city or parts of behavior that you're trying to put together in novel ways to come up with solutions for the challenges we're seeing from a climate perspective. So the mindset, the way of thinking, a lot of my strategic aptitude comes from my studying of math and physics. It's very directly related. I still mentor in the physics department at my alma mater, and I often have these conversations with students about how to apply the skills that they're learning to whatever jobs, because especially for physics, unless you're going to become an academic, there isn't really a lot of physics to this job kind of pipeline. There's lots of jobs that you could get, but sometimes there's a bit of translation needed. And so, yeah, I see my physics and mathematics background is very relevant to the work they do and prepared me for doing the things. I mean, early in my career, I was doing actual analysis and actual math and such. But now, even from a strategic perspective and from a planning perspective, that idea of putting together novel solutions is something that I directly relate to my training as a scientist.
I think that's great perspective because I think there's a great deal of stress that youth face today to have it all figured out early on. But so many industries that exist today that were not even imagined when we were growing up. So the fact that you're able to coach and mentor that through line to see where the journey goes, I think that's a really key insight.
Most of the roles I had throughout my career did not exist on the day that I graduated from university. And that's just 20 years ago. The amount that will change between starting high school and ending high school, especially in the speed with which change happens now, there's so much possibilities, especially with a program like physics and some of the other programs that are not a direct, like, I'm going to become an engineer. I'm doing engineering. I'm becoming an engineer. You see a lot of students who are anxiety because they're like, I need to get the best grades. I need to know what I'm going to do. And I often say, just get your foot in the door, just get a job, do the work. If you're interested in working in a place, get there, acclimatize yourself, and then see what kind of opportunities are there. Because it's so much cheaper to hire somebody internally than to go out on the street and hire somebody. So if you're interested in the work, even if you take a job that's not in the area, you can get there and show I'm interested in the work. I have the skills. I have the motivation. If you show that you're a good worker, 9 times out of 10, they'll support you because it's so much cheaper and easier to do that with somebody internal.
Spoken like a true veteran of going through that career journey and that evolution. It is tough to wrap your head around it when you're early in your career, but definitely those years of experience adds to that wisdom. That career evolution is evident in even the scale of the work that you do. You had started your career in cities like Richmond Hill and Mississauga, but now you participate in national and global conversations. Looking back on that journey, that scaling, that change, that evolution, how do you think your view has evolved through that journey around climate leadership? I'm curious if it changes at scale, if it changes from a city level to a global level, for example.
It's interesting because my career has gone from very local to not so local, but my view on climate leadership has taken the inverse effect from not so local to very local. The work that I do now, I have a national scope, but it is very locally focused. And I'm somewhat biased having worked in cities, but I really believe that the ideal level of climate action is at a community level because it takes it away from putting all that burden on the individual. You get the economies of scale that being at the community level can handle, but you're not losing the tapestry of a community. I will very freely admit that I am very skeptical about policy in the work that I do now. Policy has a place, but it's not the be all and end all of taking action. I really think that there's something special and magical at taking climate action at the community level, not losing the idea that there are multiple communities and multiple peoples in any one location. The specific personal and place-based context is so important to climate action and should not be erased in that work. We get too high level, we erase that. And if we get too low level, then we put that burden on people who don't really have the power to make change. If you had talked to me 17 years ago when I started my career, I probably would have been very policy and very upper government level focused, whereas now I'm very focused on how do we take action in the community? How do we involve people in that conversation? How do we enable and empower them to take action? How do we bring together interesting and novel partners to create solutions that may not be possible at other levels? And that's really been informed partially by my identity as a Black person and the ways in which the Black community have been excluded from this conversation. I was on a panel for a federal ministry, and the question was, how do we, as federal policymakers, not erase the Black community? And my answer was, that's impossible. You will erase the Black community by the fact that you are working at the federal level, and you need to accept that and find ways of bringing that policy and that power back to the community level where you don't lose that tapestry of people. My work has really been informed by coming down to that community level and involving people and engaging people and coming up with solutions that work for communities in the specific context. We erase people, we erase challenges, we erase a possibility that might exist in our specific community that we won't find if we're not looking at the community level.
Local impact is so important, but oftentimes it's so hard to know where to start. And we're fighting against all of these high level issues, this growing sense of disconnect, this lack of sense of belonging. In your experience and in your work at various scales and working in different communities, if someone were like, please, Julius, what are those things that we could do that would have the greatest impact to help us bring our community together or bring us towards positive action? What would you say?
I'm actually trying to work on a book that answers this very question because I think it is one of the most important questions from a climate change perspective. First is to accept the fact that you do not have the answers and that there is disconnect. When you accept that, then you should naturally transition to how do I put this into the hands of those in the community? Every time I do a talk, someone puts up their hand, like, we really want to work with the community, but we don't have the connection to them and they don't trust us. And I'm like, why do they need to trust you to do the work when you could just enable them to do the work? I really believe that giving the resources and the space to folks in the community to make change, as opposed to trying to make change yourself or control a change, is one of the most impactful things we can do. Oftentimes, folks who work in the climate movement and in other sort of social movements, it's like I'm the one who has to go in and do the thing and make the change, as opposed to I need to resource the people who understand what changes need to be made and enable them to do it. One of the strongest pieces of doing my work is understanding the context. So when I worked in cities, I'm working with the guy who's cleaning the pool. I'm working with the guy who's designing the roads. I'm working with the guy who's cleaning the roads. I'm working with the guy who's cutting the trees. I'm working with the person who's keeping the accounting books for the city. I cannot go into all those spaces and say to those people, you need to take climate action because it's important. They're going to be like, okay, sure, but also I have all this work that I need to do, so go away. And so my first question is always, what are you doing? What are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And once I understand their context, then I can have that conversation about how does this make your life easier? How does this make your job better? How is this going to save you money? I remember one of the things that one of my colleagues used to always bring up is that in the city of Mississauga, there was one year that we used 20,000 tons of salt, and then the very next year we used 90,000 tons of salt during the winter time. How do you budget and how do you prepare for that kind of variability? Having that conversation with folks changed the tone because people are like, wait a minute, if I had an almost five-fold increase in the amount of salt I need to spend on every year over year, my budget's going to be blown. And that's a different conversation than how do you want to take climate action? Understanding that local context is so important. And that translates to community as well in terms of understanding what are the priorities of the folks in the community that we're working with. At the David Sugar Foundation, we did a focus group in the lead up to the municipal elections in 2022. We asked folks, what do you think of the message with the climate and nature in mind? The major response we got back was, I don't understand what that means. It doesn't connect to the priorities of what I think is important. I don't get it. For me personally, and some of the work we've been doing is really around how do we understand what those people's priorities are and then have the conversation through that. So it's not about vote with what we think you should have in mind. It's what do you have in mind and then how do you need to vote to support that thing? And part of that is climate conversation because climate change affects almost everything in our society. So there's a very easy connection to the conversation, but I'm starting from a place of you find important as opposed to starting from a place that I think is important. And there's lots more things I could say, but the last one I will say is around bringing interesting and novel conversations together, creating those creative collisions of folks in the community to take action, to make change, to see the possibilities. I remember I brought the person in charge of innovation, the person in charge of public art, and the person in charge of the strategic planning for the city. These three people had never met before, and I started off with a 5-minute introduction, and they had an hour-long conversation about climate change. None of them are climate change experts, and it was one of the most interesting climate change conversations that I've ever been a part of. These are three people who'd never met before, and they are not climate change experts. But given the right context and the right information to seed a conversation, I just sat there and took notes and smiled while they come up. There's so much possibility, but You got to bring those people together. You got to feed them the right information, and then you just see what takes hold. Sometimes it'll be successful like that, and sometimes it won't. But if you don't bring those possibilities together, you don't bring those people together to explore those conversations, you're never going to get those interesting solutions.
That's really good advice. One of the biggest challenges to wrap my head around personally, within a corporate context, in community, is a growing sense of apathy. I feel increasingly that we're in this polarized world where it's not even wanting to share priorities. It's kind of like, this is my space and this is just where I want to be. And I have no capacity elsewise to look outside of that. I've alluded in a few different ways of how you potentially break down those walls and those barriers. For example, getting people into a space, getting people into community. When you navigate spaces in social media or the growing political climate, there's less of this interest on bridging and on connecting and seeing that different perspective or even coming to the table to have that conversation. Do you have any experience in those volatile situations of how to create a bridge in community, how to break down that sense of apathy to create these exciting intersections?
I see myself in my climate change work as a translator. You have to be in for building that bridge yourself. From what you were saying and the way that I see it, it's not apathy, it is fear. It's like, you want me to come over there and help you with your thing. I have too much on my plate that I need to fix. But if I come to the table with, I understand what your challenges are, and here's how I'm going to help you achieve what you are trying to achieve, 9 times out of 10, people will be like, yes, let's do it. Because you're not telling them, I want you to solve climate change. You're telling them, I'm going to help you do what you want to do. I think part of the reason for the polarization is that we are taking the stance of, I am right and my solution is right and what I need is supreme. When I encounter folks, particularly in the context of cities where you have no positional power over the person, they have no incentive to work with you. I don't try and break down those walls. I just try to understand the walls and then speak to the wall. And 9 times out of 10, people will open the door for you when they're like, wait a minute, you can help me do what I want to do. This is going to get me in front of the person that I want to talk to. This is going to make it easier for me to ask for that extra budget that I've been trying to fight for the past 5 years. That totally changes the conversation. That whole, what is in it for me, totally changes the conversation. If I feel like I'm not being heard, and if I feel like my challenges are not understood, then I'm going to shut down. I don't want to hear from you because you're not speaking to the things that I really need and I'm tired. So if I'm speaking to the things you need and you're tired, you may not feel any more energized, but you might feel like, oh, this person is going to help me. Let's have that conversation. Let's see what we can do. I've seen it time and time again. That conversation changes when you're approaching it from, how can I help you do what you want to do? How do I, so that I understand what you're going through? A lot of climate change work happens from the perspective of, science tells us that this is what we need to do, so we just need to get on with it. But how do we understand what people are going through to be able to engage with what they need to take action? I need to be a translator. I need to build that bridge. I cannot expect somebody to build that bridge for me. I need to build that bridge myself. So it's like applying for a job. I prove to the recruiter that I can do that job. It's not the recruiter's job to look through my resume and understand if I can get that job. I often tell my students to provide a Google Maps from me to the job. If I approach climate action like that, I need to provide the Google Maps for that person to get from where they are to climate action, and they're more likely to take it. But if I just put it on them and be like, you need to be engaged and you need to solve this challenge, of course they're going to be like, I'm tired. I have all these challenges. I'm struggling. I have all this stuff that I need to deal with. And you're asking me to do one more thing? That doesn't feel good. Extending that to my work with marginalized communities, that's a whole community that's being oppressed, that is challenged, that has urgent things that they're dealing with every day. And then I'm going to come in and be like, you need to forget all that and take climate action. Of course, they're not engaged. But if I come in and say, this is how addressing climate action is going to help your challenges, this is how it's going to make your life better, it's a very different conversation. So I think too often we take apathy as something because like, people aren't doing what we want them to do, but how much have we taken the time to understand them and help them do?
I love that perspective. There's a key word that keeps popping up so far in our discussion, and that is conversation. You're doing quite a bit of work around conversations and shifting conversations.
We've been talking about how do we have this conversation around climate change? How do we involve different people in the conversation? How do we have it from a different perspective? Climate action is not a process of we figure out what the solutions are and then we do that. This has to be an ongoing conversation with community. Part of our colonial legacy is that we tell people and they should do it. And government comes up with the solutions themselves and we don't engage people. I worked in cities for close to 10 years and public engagement was nothing but a compliance exercise. We talked to some people and we set up some boards at City Hall for an hour and people come yell at us and then we pick a box like, yeah, we did engagement. I'm really interested in how we do engagement deeply. How do we truly engage with community? How does this become a conversation throughout? So it's not just the five people that we always hear from. It's not the experts that are telling us what to do. Community is an expert in itself. When I worked in Richmond Hill, we had a stakeholder group of organizations and community members helping us design the plan and engage around the plan. And I had one of the people ran an environmental NGO in the community come to me the first day we had our workshop with the whole group. And she's like, why am I here? And this is somebody who's worked for the environmental ministry here in Ontario. They led a community environmental group and was asking why they were in the room. They're like, the utility is here, the school board's here, the university is here. Why do you need me? And I was like, yeah, all these people are here, but you are an expert in living in this city for 40 something years. That's expertise we need. Yes, these people will give us technical solutions about how to put a solar panel, but is it going to work? What's going on in the city? What are the challenges that people are actually having? You are the expert that we need on this project to be able to create solutions for our city. That person never asked me again why they were there and understood their contribution. So often in these types of conversations, we ask questions in ways that only a technical expert can feel engaged. And that person was a technical expert and they didn't feel empowered to answer the question. So how do we have this conversation? We empower everybody to be part of the conversation. How we empower everybody to provide their input into this conversation. I'll give one more example because I really love this example. When I worked in the city of Mississauga, we did a climate change escape room. Before the escape room, folks did a survey, and after they did a survey, and that gave us the data we needed to input into our plan. I knew it was successful because I was meeting with my HR person. And he was like, I was at the mall on the weekend, and I did this escape room, me and my 5-year-old son, and he had so much fun and he learned so much. This is somebody who worked for the city, did not realize he's being engaged for a climate change plan. Also, we had a 5-year-old input into our climate change plan. There are very few cities in the world who can say they've engaged a 5-year-old to inform the development of a climate change plan, but we could say that. We lowered the bars so low that a 5-year-old could engage and provide input into our climate change plan. To me, that's a success because we're engaging beyond the typical voices of folks who have the time and money and energy to show up at City Hall to tell the city what they want to see. We engage a 5-year-old in that conversation. And that to me is the most powerful part of reframing how we do public engagement, how we engage around climate change. Part of the power of taking a futures approach is bringing the spirit voices together, engaging people where they are and co-creating solutions for climate action.
That is amazing. I love all of the tangible examples of how you've been able to meaningfully engage with different communities. Or hesitation or anxiety typically occurs because we have so long been engaged with in ways that don't feel truthful or meaningful or authentic. So I love these examples that you've shared of ways where you could really reassure community and build that bridge so that feedback is actually meaningfully heard and used.
Part of the work that I did in Beacon Hill and Mississauga and at David Suzuki Foundation is around thinking about the future and bringing futures and foresight into the climate conversation. When I worked at the city of Mississauga, we had Peter Jones, a pretty prominent futurist and systems thinker on our consultant team. I learned a lot through that process about how to bring futures into this work.
One of the things you alluded to was foresight. I feel like for those operating in the foresight space, the word itself could mean so many different things. The purpose of this podcast is to democratize futures and foresight. We might even have listeners who maybe this is their first foray into foresight or futures. So, when you mention foresight, what does it mean to you? And how does that look in practice?
I do like strategic foresight as a word because I often use it in contrast to strategic planning, where strategic planning, you have a single goal and you figure out the steps to get to that goal. Having done it a few times, I find that quite limiting. And so to me, strategic foresight in futures is about coming up with multiple goals or ideas of what the future can be and using that information to understand how we can move forward. What are the interventions that we might want to take? A key part of how I do futures with foresight is centered around the idea of the multiverse. This is something that I got from my son, so I have to reference him. He is 7 years old. I've learned a lot from my 7-year-old. This idea of different ideas, different contexts. We live with multiple realities in our world today. How do we use that rich tapestry of information to understand how we move forward or what we might want to do or what we might want to take into account when we are planning for the future? Climate action work is largely a future planning exercise. I really look at futures and foresight as a way of bringing complexity into that idea of how do we strategically plan for the future? Where are we trying to go? What is that desirable future? What are the possible contradictory or crazy things that might happen that we want to take into account or might give us important information for how we can move forward? I'm really challenging in all of my work the idea of linearity in a process and really thinking about multiplicity and complexity. That's really what strategic foresight and futures is for me. So I was having a conversation last week with one of my collaborators around the idea of systems thinking and foresight and futures. For me, they're all the same thing. And I asked the person, is people out there doing strategic foresight and not doing systems at the same time? Because for me, they are so inextricably linked. It comes back to me being a Black person, me being in a marginalized community, me being a race. I have almost 20 years of experience in the climate space, and my experience and my thoughts and my work is still very frequently erased. And so it's natural or a reflex to challenge that by saying I need to take multiple contexts and ideas and realities into account.
Speaking of your experience about being a Black person and being in a marginalized community and the perspective it's given you to be able to take multiple contexts and ideas and realities into account, you have the Prismatic Project, which seeks to center Indigenous and Black perspectives. And I was wondering if you would be able to share with listeners what the Prismatic Project is. If you could tell us a little bit more about it and how it began.
The Prismatic Project is building a game to facilitate those conversations around climate change. Most folks in Canada have played a game. At some point, probably sat down with the game, read the rules, figured it out. So we're lowering the barrier to entry in terms of that conversation and seeding people with the information that they can have that conversation with. Part of the information that's going to go into the game and the mechanics of the way the game is played is based on Black and Indigenous worldviews. It's approaching this challenge from a different perspective. How do we base this on the worldviews of the most marginalized people in Canada? And how do we bring that into that conversation? As people are playing the game, they're engaging with those worldviews and thinking about it from that perspective and getting out a very traditional Western science paradigm for climate action in Canada. It's like alternative timelines because as folks play the game, they're going to wrestle with the past, present, and future. Those alternative timelines would be used in two ways. The first is if an organization or a group was playing the game and they played a number of times, they would get that information to use as a part of their planning. When I worked in Richmond Hill, we used the game as part of the development of the climate change plan. And it really changed the idea of like what climate change would be, what should be included in it, what we should be talking about. This is another opportunity for organizations to play a game and to get some information back that would inform how they think about and plan around climate action. The other way that alternate timelines would be used would be on an online platform that folks can interact with. They can see what kinds of other futures other people are imagining related to climate action. It'll allow them to explore them, connect them, build upon them, but then take that overall data set and give it to Indigenous futurists and Afrofutures artists to create scenarios of the future that are from a Black and or Indigenous perspective. These artists have a process for creating futures, and so giving them data and tapping into that being our hypothesis is that that will be very different from the very traditional paradigm that we use for climate action in Canada, which is still very much rooted in colonialism and capitalism. The artist that I often reference, I'm not working with him, but I am a fan. His name is Equanimicau. He creates Afrofuturist cities out of all Black Lego. Imagine him taking this data that's generated by people and communities and organizations across the country and literally building an Afrofuturist city out of all Black language. What kind of ideas and solutions would he create in a city such as that? And then putting those out in the world and engaging folks around those ideas. In all stages, we were trying to engage Black and Indigenous voices in this project. We were trying to have outputs be from a Black and or Indigenous lens. And we're really interested in challenging that paradigm.
The Prismatic Project honestly sounds so amazing. So, how can we play the game? For those who are interested in engaging with the Prismatic Project or experiencing it, how can individuals learn more or partake in the experience?
But we're still at the very beginning of the project. We are still in the development phase. They were developing a game for it to be an online game, lowering those barriers to entry for folks to play. We are doing some fundraising to develop the game, but there will be some public presence where folks can follow along with the development of the game and engage with the ideas in the process. There's a team of us that's working together. And part of what we're realizing with the development of Prismatic is that the game is important, but the way that we're developing it and the ideas that we're centering through the development of it are just as important. So we're also looking at ways that we can share those ideas and those, for lack of a better word, techniques and frameworks, although I don't like the word framework, that we're using to inform our work. It will take a little time to develop the game. We want also to be able to engage folks around the ideas of what we're doing as a team and what Prismatic is about from an ideological perspective, and from the roots of what we are building into the game beyond the game experience itself. But encourage folks to follow along, to engage with the ideas and concepts that we would be putting out.
That's awesome. And that's definitely something we'll share in the show notes so listeners can follow along. In the meantime, is there anything else on the horizon for you or your work that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I alluded to it earlier. I'm working on a book around futures and foresight in the climate space with a multiverse and Afrofuturist perspective or framing. If that excites anyone, love to chat more. A lot of the public speaking that I do comes from that perspective as well. So happy to come and talk to people about my approach to climate action and everything we've covered today. I know a lot of this teaser for the work that I've been doing. So if folks are interested in hearing more, I'm happy to speak to folks. I do a fair amount of public speaking and I really enjoy it. I'm doing the book partially to have folks engage with the ideas if they can't see me speak, because it's only a small percentage of folks that have the ability to travel to conferences and stuff. I really believe that this is the direction that we need to take. So really leading into doing that work as much as possible and creating things that show what the possibilities are. You asked earlier, how do we get people outside of that apathy and reticence? And part of it for me is show and prove. There were many people that we had that conversation about the escape room before we did it who were like, what are you even talking about? But after it was done, they're asking us, how do we do that? And so for me, I'm going to do it and then I'm going to show you how cool it is. And then you're going to want to do it too. And that to me is a win. For all these things that I really believe in, I'm going to do it. I'm going to show people and then hopefully they think it's cool and they want to do it too.
That is definitely key. And this has come up a few times in previous conversations. The fear of failure that prevents us from putting things out, but that it doesn't have to be perfect. If you put it out there, it begins the conversation. And I can definitely see that in the context of the work and all of the work you've done. With that being said, thank you so much, Julius. I really appreciate the time and the wisdom that you've been able to share with our guests. We really appreciate it. So thank you again for joining.
Thank you. It's been great. I love to have these kind of conversations. Thanks for having me.
That was Julius Lindsay reminding us that the most powerful action doesn't just happen in policy rooms, it happens in communities, in conversation and in collaboration. From the physics classroom to the city hall to the futures lab, Julius's work shows how creativity and curiosity can shift what's possible when we give people the space, tools, and trust to lead. What particularly resonated for me in this conversation was Julius's call and intent to show and prove. To stop waiting for perfect systems or permission, and instead create something real that others can see, learn from, and build upon. Whether it's a community initiative, a new way of engaging people, or even a climate escape room, Julius's work reminds us that meaningful change starts with doing, not waiting. As you reflect on today's episode, I urge you to consider what possibilities could you unlock if you stop trying to control the outcome and instead empowered yourself and others to shape it with you. Don't forget to follow along with the Prismatic Project as it develops its interactive game and continues exploring new ways of engaging people in climate futures through Black and Indigenous lenses. Other resources, initiatives, and organizations mentioned in this episode are also linked in the show notes found on futureshub.ca. I'm your host, Mia, and this has been another episode of Futures Hub. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your network, leave us a review, and help us bring more people into this conversation about the futures we can co-create. Tag us on Instagram or LinkedIn, share your thoughts, and let's keep the discussion going about how we can shape better futures together. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Futures Hub so you never miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep imagining, keep co-creating, and keep working towards those better futures for all.